Aloha, friends, and welcome back to this week's episode on the Embodied Healing Self with a guest speaker who I'm so excited to share with you.
You're so
I,
sweet.
I really am. I'm so excited. Karen Kenney is a spiritual mentor, a writer, and a speaker. And I first got to hear her speak live just a couple months ago up in New Hampshire at the Ignite Your Soul Summit with Amber Lillystrom. And had such a profound experience, actually, quite honestly, in the witnessing of my soul sister next to me. It was such a gift to witness a shift in energy, just a huge shift in energy in her, that I was so just like, I mean, I don't even have the words for it. It was like this sister friend of mine, Heather, she's, we've been on a journey for quite some time. And to be in the space and the experience of being able to witness such a profound shift in somebody that you deeply love and connect with is very powerful.
Aww.
And so, I'm getting covered in goosebumps just thinking about it. And I'm just so excited to share you with the listeners today and some of the messaging that you share in the world and the work that you do. So thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, Jen, thank you so much for your kind and generous words and for inviting me. I always say and I'm like a broken record about this, but I never, ever, ever take it for granted when somebody invites me either on their stage or to their event to speak or onto their podcast, because it gives me an opportunity to share what I love and talk about things that I love with people I love, and to also meet a new audience of people. And my goal is always, I say, either to educate, elevate, or entertain. It's to be helpful in some way or to add value in some way. And to anybody who's listening right now, I always say this too, that I know you could be anywhere. Like, you could be anywhere in the world doing whatever in the world, but for some reason right now you are hearing our voices and we are having this moment of communion together. So thank you so much for saying yes and to being willing and listening. And it's a happy honor to be here. So just thank you so much for the warm welcome. And yeah, it's really interesting. I've spoken to Heather a couple of times, and she did a little testimonial video about her experience, seeing me speak. And I'm always just I laugh because I'm like, it's not that, look, I understand the work and the time that I've put in to be at a place where I'm a spiritual mentor, a writer, and a storyteller, and a speaker, and all that. But I just still see myself as goofy old weird me, hey, so, but listening to you say, oh, she had a profound experience, I just giggle, I just laugh. I'm like, yep, spiritual team on the job. Thank you very much. I just get to be my weirdo little self, and if that's helpful, awesome. So thank you for reflecting that back to me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. And I love how you give credit to your spiritual team, because just before we hopped on this call together, we just took a moment to really call in our spirit team and request that whatever messaging comes through today is something that touches the lives of the listeners in a way that allows them to heal or receive, or, just connect in a way that serves them in the highest intention. So we're going to dive into a little bit of that today as well.
Awesome. I see it all as an opportunity, to just plant seeds. And A Course in Miracles talks about it how miracles are a natural extension of love. They just happen naturally where love is. And that sometimes as a person, whether you're a coach, a mentor, a leader, a speaker, somebody who gets out in front of others or shares your message, quote unquote, with others. And Marianne Williamson, my spiritual godmother, always says, it's not about getting the message out. It's about getting the message in, to yourself first, which I really love. But so my whole point being is that I see these opportunities when we're talking on podcasts and interviews and these different things. It's an opportunity to plant seeds. As A Course in Miracles says, and we're back, I'll finish my thought. We sometimes won't even know the effect. We might not even, you might plant a seed, or somebody hears something that takes 3 years or whatever to blossom or bloom or come to life. So we're not privy to the knowing of the effect or the cause that you'll have. Your job is to just receive whatever the information is. We call it the individual curriculum in Course in Miracles. Call it your divine assignment, whatever. Have me go where you would have me go, have me say what you would have me say, all that. So I just say what they would have me say. I've just now become a really good listener. And then I'm not afraid to be unpopular or to say the thing that needs to be said, so I just say it. So yeah, when we get to have these amazing conversations, we get to we don't know the effect of what can happen. So it's just really cool to be able to like plant seeds, and we're planting seeds for ourselves too, and to just kind of dwell in possibility and what's possible. So it's pretty cool.
I love your energy. Like, I'm just sitting, like, I just love being able to witness. I think, and I do want to dive into a little bit about what your story was, or what you shared on the stage, and how powerful that is, and just get some of the listeners to connect with that. But when I think of the word authenticity, which is one of my core values, you were
Me
the
too.
first
It's one of my core values too. I call it the big three. It's one of my big three: authenticity. Yeah.
Well, I would just like to let you know that you are the person that, to me, embraces authenticity.
Oh,
And I mean that in the truest sense. Like, I see, you know, the joy in the inner child. I see like the truth that wants to be shared. I see the really big open heart, and I see also the wisdom that comes through as well. And you know, I live in Florida, and so I just, for my listeners that are listening locally, like, so Karen is from New England. If you can tell by her accent already, you're gonna hear the word wicked a couple times. You're gonna hear her R's turn into A's. So, and I love that, and I really love that, because it's just you. It's who you are. You own it, and you know, just whatever comes through, you're speaking in a way that really isn't. You're just speaking, you know, through from your divinely guided spirit team. And it really just gives us permission to do the same. And I really appreciate that, to show up in a way, because I think that is mentors and coaches and teachers, we have a responsibility to show up in a way that is authentic and that is being divinely guided. And then we notice that these emotions or fears or limiting beliefs, which are which come from the stories, which we're going to get into, show up. And then they start to create like a different inner dialogue, and we become disconnected, which is not divine and is not whole and not complete.
Yeah. So to speak to that, like I always say to people, you know, if it's not truth, it's theater. And I see a lot of people who perform. I see a lot of coaches, especially. I see it a lot, you know, just in the self-help world and all the spiritual. So there's a lot of performing going on. And for me, that's not interesting. I really want to meet, I want to know you. I don't want to know the pretty version of you or the social media perfect version of you, or like, I want to know you. And even though my work is in transforming stories, right? Your story to your glory. Like, it's the name of one of my mentoring programs, your story to your glory. So transforming these stories. It doesn't mean your stories are bad. It just means the way that we're looking at them and the meaning we've applied to them, that disconnect that you're talking about, right? So if we believe the bullshit story that we're bad, we're shameful, we're guilty, we're sinners, we're this, you're going to start to write a story about yourself. And if you believe that story, you're going to start to show up in the world different than you truly are, or disconnected, or desensitized, or whatever. So what I'm saying is, I like to meet a person exactly where they are, and then be able to look at that story and be like, is that still serving you? How about we have a willingness to let go of the story and then rewrite something with spirit, you know what I'm saying? So, but I don't want people putting on an act or a show. Be exactly where you are, because the only way that you're going to change something is first to have clarity and awareness around the fact that something needs to change. And you don't know something, like if you're just trying to hide it by putting on fucking makeup on it or like dressing it up, I'm like, it's still a stinking, I'm like, we don't like just put a Band-Aid on it, on a gaping wound, and hope it heals, right? Like, no, we got to address it. We got to go into the darkness and bring the light. We got to bring it out of the darkness into the light. So yeah, don't pretend or don't fake it. Like, let's meet where we really are. And then what are we going to do about it? Like, what now? And Marianne has always said, and I love it, it's like, I paraphrase it. I use it. I mold it a little bit differently. But the heartbeat of what's being said is, it doesn't matter where your trauma, where your bullshit, where your stories, where your sickness, where your depression, your addiction. Doesn't matter where you got it. It's yours now. So what are we going to do about it? But let's at least be brave enough to be honest about, this is who I am right now. This is how I'm showing up. Who you are, to me, is always a child of God, an extension of love. Who you are is perfect, is the light of the world, but that's your spirit self. I always say to people, yeah, you know what? You are the light of the world. You are a perfectly innocent child of God, and your fucking personality could use some work. Your ego choices could take some tweaking. So
Yeah.
it's both. So we're spiritual beings having a human experience. And here in the human experience, we just have to take a look sometimes. So it's not helpful to anybody if we're all walking around like pretending. So that's why authenticity and genuineness, truth, as we understand it, there's only one true capital T, which is you are love. And your only job is to extend that love. But here in the human experience, it can get really confusing for people. It can be wicked hard to be in this human experience sometimes. But the only way it's going to change is if we're really, really honest with ourselves.
Yeah, I often say thank you for sharing all that, because one of the things that I like to say is that we are the authors of our own story.
100%.
And so even though we have these experiences that happen to us from trauma and that create separation and grief, we get to choose how we show up in that experience. We get to shift our perception or rewrite our story. And it's not easy, and it takes a commitment, and it takes work. And the authenticity piece comes in, because what I noticed that can happen in the world of coaching that I live in is that many of our inability to be well right now, to not be receiving wellness, happiness, connection, is coming from a source of disconnection. When we are not well, when we do not know that truth that we are a child of God, we are just love. When we lose that part of us and we start to get lost in our identities and our roles and our stories, which we're going to dive into, when we get lost in those roles, identities and stories, we become disconnected, and that disconnection is we are not whole, and it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. And so one of the things that Karen, that you do so well, and was the story that you shared on the stage, was, and I'm just going to share briefly your personal story with your,
yes, please do.
With your permission.
Of course.
And so Karen, you have a very profound story of when you were a child, and a lot of pain and grief around losing your mother, and losing her in a way that was just very, very painful. Your mother was murdered when you were 12. So as you were 12, right? Yep. So stepping into your womanhood, stepping into a space where you needed your mother, you needed that role model. And then, somebody else basically came into the bigger picture and removed her from your life.
Yes.
And now I know that most of the listeners here may not be able to relate to a story with such deep pain as that. And we all have our stories. Mine is one of a near-death experience. And although I know that many listeners can't relate to that, what we can relate to is that when these things happen in our life, when these traumatic events happen, we create survivor strategies. And we're not even, I know I wasn't even ready to talk about my story for like 6 years. I couldn't even talk about it. We have to go through our stages of grief, right? We go through this whole process. And the first part of it is the awareness that being real about the experience. But we develop these survivor strategies, and and then we create a belief. And what I know to be true is that this belief, and it might even be subconscious, tends to create a pattern or a story that then starts to run our life.
Yeah, so I'm just going to jump in very quickly, and if you have more to say, I want you to continue. But one of the things I want to say is the reason why those beliefs become so powerful, or to me, stories are just simply like beliefs, right? So the story is whether I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, whatever we start to believe about ourselves, our brothers and sisters, in the world around us, is so often, so much happens when we're children. And a child's mind is not able to process from reason and rationale. At that age, like when I was 12, or if anything happens in that realm from our early years, right? Because our brains don't even finish forming until we're like 22 or something. But it's like we attach meaning. So in A Course in Miracles, we say everything has the meaning that we've given it. And so when we're little kids, the meaning that we attach to an experience, or to pain or grief or suffering, it's not rational, it's emotional. So I might have had a feeling at 12 years old or previous. My whole childhood was kind of a shit show in a way, you know, and I'm grateful for it now, right? At the time, it was like, but I look back and I think, oh, I created some stories, some beliefs, and what you think you become. So your thoughts become your words and your actions. They become your character. They become your, right, how you show up in the world. So I created these beliefs that were based on the emotions of a terrified child. So if those things don't get dealt with, so as a spiritual mentor, people will often say, like, so, you know, if you're an entrepreneur, is your audience, do you have a lot of entrepreneurs in your audience? Do you know?
Actually, I have maybe like 20%. I'm a numbers person.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So when you're whatever you're putting out into the world, even on social media, like, right? It's like, so you have to figure out, like, well, who are my listeners? Who's listening to this? Like, who am I helping? Whatever. So you figure out, like, what your message is or your marketing is. And you have to say, well, who do I work with? Who's listening? Or in that case. And people always say to me, oh, you work with women or you work with this. And I always say, no, I work with people. But then they'll say, oh, you work with adults. And I always laugh at that. And I go, what? What I really work with is wounded children in adult bodies. That's who I'm really working with, if we're going to call a spade a spade. So it's like, that's what I'm saying. So often the strategies, the survival strategies and the mechanisms that we put in place when we're very young, when we get older, the very thing that they were designed to do, which was to protect us, they actually, as adults, you know this, I'm not saying anything you don't know, and a lot of people know, they become actually like what I call the shield. You put your dukes up, they become defense mechanisms that now are not just keeping the world out to keep you safe, they're keeping you trapped in. So we have to be able to look at that and say, like, oh, what I believe to be true, I believed that when I was really young. So we have to be vigilant for the quality of our thoughts and our beliefs and the stories that we're telling ourselves. And it's like, at some point, we also have to be willing to recognize, oh, this is no longer working. This strategy is now becoming actually a shield that I use to, and you heard me say it at the summit, like, I want to try to move through the world with nothing to attack, defend, or prove. And I do that by simply just being myself. I'm not trying to be right. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to make you buy anything from me. I'm not trying to, like, you know, in A Course in Miracles asks the question beautifully, do you want to be right? Do you prefer to be right or happy? For many, many years, I wanted to be right. But in order for me to be right, I had to make a brother or a sister wrong. And you will suffer. As soon as you do that, you will suffer. So it's like, now I just want to be happy, because that Course in Miracles says our natural inheritance is peace and happiness. So I always say to my people, if you're not consistently peaceful and happy, we have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Like we've taken a detour into fear. And so whenever we take a detour into fear, we now don't want to beat ourselves up and claim ourselves as being sinful or guilty. It's like you just have to redirect back to your inner teacher, or to use your inner GPS, which I always say, like, God's pretty smart. That's what it stands for. So we got to listen.
I love that.
Yeah, God's pretty smart. So, like, listen. And one of the things that you said that I just want to kind of reflect on, because I just think language is, like, so important. And so when you say we have these beliefs or these stories and then we disconnect, what I always like to point out, or to just expand upon what you said, is that disconnection is not a truth. You can never disconnect from your source. You are always an extension of the divine, but you can have an experience. You can believe, you can convince yourself. The ego can convince you that you're separate. And if you have that thought, you will experience it in your body and in your world. However, you can never be disconnected from your truth and your source, that you are love and you are an extension of that love. So it's helpful for us to remember. And I always say, like, it's prodigal son. We are always welcome back home at any time. We can go back at any time. You do not collect $200. You're not in trouble. You're not going to jail. You're not going to get shamed or blamed. You can go home to the truth of yourself anytime you want to. You might take 1,000 detours into fear a day. You can always come back, and we're back. You can always come back. And so I just want people to understand disconnection is a choice. It's a state of mind. The divine doesn't go anywhere. We're the ones that like moonwalk out of the room. The divine doesn't go anywhere. It's just waiting there patiently.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you for that clarity. And I'm 100% in alignment with that. It is, and there is power in words. So thank you for clarifying that,
yes,
it's the perception of being disconnected that actually can
cause. Exactly. Perfect.
And it causes suffering and it causes fear, which is a contracted state. It is not love, right? There's this opposite opposing force of fear and love. And you said that somewhere in something you wrote or something.
Yesterday I did a post about like love does not happen in a contracted state, because it's this. And those of you at home, if you're listening and not watching, I'm like balling up my fist, like tight fist. And the experience, I believe, of love and the experience of the divine or God, it's an open-handed thing. And there's a beautiful passage in A Course in Miracles that I'm paraphrasing, but it basically says, let go of all thoughts of who you think you are and what you think God is, and come fully empty-handed unto your God. Like, just show up in the willingness and the knowing of like, we write all these stories about what's true about us, and they're almost never in our own favor. And we often don't write them in the favor of our brothers and sisters. And I'm always like, if we're going to tell stories, can we tell the stories where we're reflecting? You know, Course in Miracles says, child of God, you were created to create the good, the beautiful, and the holy. Do not forget this. And we forget it all the time. So I want to be rewriting stories or writing stories that are a reflection of the truth and the goodness of who we are. And in stories of redemption and salvation. And I don't mean them in religious terms. I mean, truly. It's like the phoenix from the ashes, the rise and the return of the knowing of the true self. So we can stop the bullshit and stop the blaming and like get serious about your life. Because look, I'm 50 now. I've lived more years than I'm going to have in front of me. Like the clock is a ticking. And with the time I have left, and I don't know your full story, but with your near-death experience, it's like, I know I've only got so much limited time here in this illusion, in the dream. And I want to, do I want to use this time in service to the divine? And I really clearly get, like, my mother was 33 when she was murdered, when she was beaten to death, right? It was brutal. It was violent. It was awful. This growing older is a privilege that is not extended to everybody. So I don't want to waste my time and screw around with like stories that keep me oppressed, keep me small, keep me stuck and scared and separate and sick. That's not interesting to me anymore. For many years, I was a professional victim. I love suffering. Right? I loved being in it. I didn't think that, but clearly I did by what I was choosing. And I will say, because you mentioned this too, and I think it's important. You said that not everybody could relate to maybe a near-death experience, or not everybody could relate to like a murdered mother. But I will say this. One of the things that having that experience taught me when I was old enough to start to understand and pay attention at a deeper level was that all suffering is suffering. It doesn't matter the form that it takes. And I often say to people, because I work with a lot of people in grief and stuff like that too. People who have had, I always say I work with people who've had more than their fair share of wicked hard shit happen. Right? That's like my people. So the island of misfit toys kids, like the weird, like the people who've just gone through some shit that it's like nobody else can relate. It's like, I get it. Right. So one of the things that I often say is, when you're a child and your dog is your best friend and that dog dies, it is a level of grief that is no different. It's different, but samesies. I always say samesies, different samesies. It's the same thing, because there's no grief comparison shot, right? It's like suffering is suffering. And so having suffered so deeply, it taught me to have deep compassion for other people, even if their suffering is only perceived suffering. And the only job, A Course in Miracles says that people are either showing love, they're extending love, or they're crying out for love. They're crying out for help. And the only sane response is love. People cry out for help in really fucked up ways. People do really insane things, really seeking love. They don't know that, right? And so love doesn't always respond, though. I say sometimes the most loving thing is to go, no. So it doesn't mean you become a doormat in service to love. But I just want to say to people, it's like, of course they can relate to a near-death experience, because a near-death experience is like not that exact details.
But the internal experience.
Yeah, suffering is suffering. And having a divine experience, like seriously, like why do you think when people have an orgasm, they often will say, "Oh God."
Yeah.
When you eat something delicious, delicious, you're like, "Oh God, this is."
Yeah.
So I'm like, what I say is, the things that we're chasing in this world, whether it's the high of some sort of drug, or the buzz from alcohol, or the orgasm or the feeling from sex, or the high you get from shopping, or the feeling you get when you listen to a piece of music that moves you, or the feeling you get when you read a piece of poetry or prose or a book, or that feeling that you get where you're like the rapture, right? We think we're chasing the high, the buzz, the food, the porn, what the experience that you're having in that moment of, it's the memory of God's love.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're always going for. And the reason why this world, I always say the things of this world will never satiate. They can't. Because they can't replicate that experience of God's love. But we try to use the things of this world. Even like think about partnering.
To make sense. Yeah.
To try and have that experience of oneness. That's what we're going for. And of Course in Miracles, we say heaven it's not a place. It's the experience of knowing complete oneness.
Yep.
And that's what we're going for when we go shopping. We don't know that. It's like, but when we go shopping, or we buy the thing, or we eat the food, or get drunk, or whatever people are trying to do, they're trying to have the remembrance, the feeling of God's love. And it's always available to us, and we don't have to experience it. And we can't really, truly, even with sex, when you think about it, we're literally trying to get inside each other to have an experience of oneness. But there always in bodies has to be the separation. That's why this world is never going to fully satiate. So I just want to invite people into the knowing that the work is in remembering who you already are.
Yep. Which is a child of God. It's and your second to last podcast episode. By the way, Karen Kenney is just the podcast, right? It's just your name.
The Karen Kenney Show.
The Karen Kenney Show was, I believe it was alignment in simplicity.
Oh, the ability to simplify. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the ability to simplify. And I guess what I received from it is like, it all comes down to, it really is that simple. We like to complicate things, but it all comes down to like this internal experience of existence of just simply who we are, which is just simply love, and just the remembering of that.
Yes.
So I want to go back to a question that came up for me, because I think this will really benefit the listeners.
Please, yeah.
So here's something that I noticed. And in your last podcast with Marianne, there were so many things that were said that I loved. And one of the things that I love that she said is, if you're ready to heal, get real. And so some of that, so what that is an invitation to really like get clear on the truth of how you're showing up in the world. And I think in your Simplicity podcast, which I'm in alignment with all of this, or at some point in time, you said something about like, put your money and your time where your values are. And so So what
I said was, if you want to know what you truly value, look at your calendar or your schedule, and look at your bank account and your credit card statements, because it's going to show you every day where you spend your time, where you spend your money. So it's one thing to say, for an example, like, I really want to go to all my kids' games. I don't want to miss their soccer games or their softball games or whatever the thing is. But if you look at your calendar and you're consistently missing them, right? If you say to me, you want to get healthy, and I look at your credit card statement, and you're eating at Chick-fil-A and you're not going to the gym, there's no gym membership or, yoga thing, or what, you haven't bought new sneakers in a while or whatever. It's like, we have to just be honest with ourselves and really look. Your values, you can talk a good talk. I don't give a shit. If you write down your big three, my core values are these things, but they're not reflected anywhere in your life, then you're full of shit. So I just always invite people into, like what Marianne said was, if you want to heal, you have to get real. So I just invite people into having a real, honest look. Like take, as they say in 12-step programs, they have a saying like, take a fearless moral inventory, right? So be willing to really look at how you're spending your time, how you're spending your money, and is it what you're saying actually in alignment with what you're doing? Because if it's not, if what you say you value is not actually being applied and lived in your life, you will suffer. You will create incongruency. There will not be an alignment, a divine alignment. And if you don't do that, it's going to get really weird for you and everybody around you, because you're actually behaving in a thought system of fear and not actually a thought system of love. So you're saying, oh,
Yep.
this is what is important to me. Well, but you're not reflecting that in your words and your actions. So you are out of integrity.
Mm-hmm. And where I'm going with this is one of the things that came through to me as I was listening to both of these is that I want to ask the question, like for the listeners, what are some tips or ways that listeners would notice when their story is writing them? And where I'm going with this is that if we're saying that we want to heal and to get real about it, but we notice that these patterns and excuses coming up, which you and I both know in the work that we do, it happens. It's like people are like all ready to get in and feel good and you're my mentor. And then when it comes down to it, they're like, oh no, there's some excuse that comes up, which I'm connecting the dots for the listener that this is where those patterns or beliefs are showing up underneath the surface from the story that's still possibly there, which is why the work that you're doing to help people to get out of their story, or really the way I look at it is to choose to show up differently in an empowered way around the story, right? Because it's still a part of who we are. But that's why this is so important, because like you said, we're coming from a place of fear and we're stuck. And for listeners who are wondering, like, just to paint the picture of something that's more easy to relate to, because we can see this. I want to lose 20 pounds. I haven't lost it in 3 years. Well, what is the underlying pattern, belief, or story that keeps showing up around that as to why you're not fully committed to changing something that you're doing currently, or if it's, possible that it changes. So the question around that is, for the listeners, I think this is really important for them to listen to, because some of them are listening right now and they're probably feeling a sensation in their body. Like, oh, like I really know there's this thing I want to do. And there's this thing that, they might be noticing for the first time a sensation in their body that's creating a similar sensation to an experience that they had before that they might not be aware of. But what are some tips, some tangible tips that we can sort of check in with ourselves as we witness ourselves when the story is controlling us or creating our experience and we're not empowered in that experience?
Yeah. So basically what you're describing is being a victim, right?
Yes.
It's like, so we've been raised in a culture where we've been taught that the world is the cause of our suffering. The world is causal. I am at the mercy of the world, right? I am at the effect of what the world is doing to me, okay? So we've been taught from the get-go to be victims and to be disempowered. So one of the first things that A Course in Miracles says is, we cannot always change, it's paraphrasing. We can't change what happens in the world. We're not in control of every little single thing, right? I can't always change what happens in the world, but I can always change how I think about what happens in the world, which is, what is the meaning that I am assigning to this event, this person, this thing, which is also going back to cause and effect. So here's what A Course in Miracles teaches us, right? And I'll give an example. What A Course in Miracles basically said is the world around us is simply an outward reflection of an inward condition. Mm-hmm. So what you believe, the stories that you tell, you basically project out onto the world. Then you have a memory lapse and you forget that you've projected it out there. And you just see shit being reflected back to you and you're like, this is happening to me. We forget that we actually created it. So think of it like if you're at the movies and up in the projection booth, there's something being projected onto a screen, okay? If we don't like what's happening on the screen, literally what's happening in the story, or the film starts to get weird or flicker or the sound gets weird, You know that the problem isn't out there on the screen. You're not in the movie theater going to go pound on the screen, change. No. Where is it being projected from? You go up to the projection booth. So the projection is the cause. The screen is the effect. Our thinking inward condition is the cause. The world is simply the effect. So if we don't like what we're feeling or what's happening, I always say the body in and of itself, all the faith traditions tell us this. This is not an eternal thing. It's born, this meat puppet is going to die. The costume has to go back to the costume shop after the party. This is not who we are. It is just a vehicle. It is a learning vessel. It allows us to do what we're here to do, right? So I use it as a tool, but I want it to be in service to me. So one of the great things, though, I will say about bodies, it's like a tuning fork. It's like a divine instrument, only in that it gives you immediate feedback. So if somebody's like, oh, like you said, they're having a feeling in their body right now. I always say, how do you know that your instructions came from your ego mind or the divine mind? I ask, how does it make you feel? If you feel calm and peaceful, you're pretty sure you know where the instructions came from. If you feel nervous and scared and worried and freaked out and judgy and you know where the instructions are coming from. So if you know you're having a repeated pattern in your body, it can be anything from anxiety to irritable bowel to depression to whatever. This thing, it's not who we are, but it helps us reflect when something in the mind goes awry. The body is simply a puppet of the mind. It is taking its instructions. That's why A Course in Miracles says all healing happens on the level of the mind. So you can give it aspirin and chemo and things, but if we don't get the mind right, and so it's like, it's a really powerful thing when you understand the power of your mind and to change your mind. So if you don't like how you feel, if you don't like how things are unfolding, the very first step is to search your mind for what are the thoughts and the beliefs that I have? What are the stories that I've told myself about myself? So I always say, in order for change to happen, there's a 4-step process. I call it the CAs, the 4 C's and the 4 A's. It's much more extensive, but I'll just narrow it down for the listeners. So the first thing you have to do is have clarity and awareness. You have to first recognize shit has hit the fan. Something's wrong here. The marriage is falling apart. I've been having migraine headaches for 2 weeks. Whatever the thing is, however things can go wrong in this world, we start to have a story or a pattern. We have to first of all see it. Clarity and awareness. Something needs to change. That's the next step. You have to have compassion and acceptance. This is where I'm at. These are where my choices have led me. I can't fight it anymore. I can't deny it anymore. I can't wish it away. I can't drink it away. I can't numb it out. It's not enough wine at 1 o'clock to make this better. So it's like, okay, I have now become aware that there's a problem. I now am being kind to myself and compassionate that I was doing the best that I could. My previous choices landed me here. Well, now what? What do I do about it? Well, the next step, and this is the step that everybody misses. They like to just go to the last step, but this is the crucial step. You have to have connection and alignment. Because if you don't tap into the part of your mind that's always in communion with God, if you don't tap into what I call your spiritual team, if you don't tap into the inner teacher, you will be taking your instructions from the ego. And if you and the ego are driving the bus, you're all fucked. You're in big, big, big trouble. Because it is the quality of the level of thinking from the ego that got you where you are. The solution for things of this world do not lie in this world. They come from a higher place, a transcendent place. What we say in A Course in Miracles, above the battleground. So you need connection and alignment next, right? Then you have to have courage to take the action. So courage to take inspired action and to follow the instructions that you've got. So A Course in Miracles says, today I will make no decisions by myself. What that means is I will not be making decisions by myself with the ego, because that'll be a shit show. So today I will be making decisions not by myself because it's no longer intelligent to do that. I've seen what that's brought me. So I'm going to choose something different. I'm going to tap into something different. And so in order to have the connection and alignment piece, though, it takes some time. That's daily spiritual practices. Meditation, prayer, contemplation, alignment, yoga, whatever you're doing. I mean, and you can't just go to yoga class and sweat and say, oh, I had a spiritual practice today. It's not how it works. It's like we're talking. Can't just have the statues and the crystals and the oils and feel like, oh, I lit some incense, me and God are one. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, you are one. But in order to have a conscious connection, some daily spiritual practices are really helpful. And then once you do that long enough, that relationship of trust grows stronger. Your confidence in who you really are, your connection to the truth of yourself grows stronger. So then you will start to have more courage and confidence to go out into the world and take aligned, inspired action. That's how we change anything. It's a very simple 4-step process. And it's like, it's great. But then there's always, the ego will try to confuse you and it will say, but how do you really do that? I'm like, if it's still confusing to you and I'm not being fresh, this is when you hire a spiritual mentor. This is when you hire somebody to take you by the hand and say, I'm going to walk with you for a while. I'm going to help you to remember who walks beside you, right? Course in Miracles, this is the heartbeat of my whole business. You know, if you knew who walks beside you on this way that you have chosen, fear would be impossible.
I love that. And what I want to say, and just intervene really quickly to say, is that you actually have this offering on your website for people to download an invitation to connect with their spirit team. And I want to share
your free guide to building your spiritual team, right?
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that because what is coming through for me is that one of the ways that we perceive this disconnection of source energy is if we feel like we're not supported. And what came through to me, because I had my own experience recently, or I guess I'm sharing from a personal experience, is that we are always supported by God and our spiritual team. Like, and Karen, you and I, like, this is something that I realize is one of my gifts. Like, this is something that I was born with, that I've known. And I also want to use this kind of as an invitation to ask another question. This, to me, this is a very intimate relationship. This is not about like me showing up in a religious way that is, that the external world might view as me showing my commitment to grace or to God or whatever the word that people is using is. But for me, this experience is very, very intimate and very, very personal. And what I hear you saying is the importance of the daily commitment to those practices to be in alignment with that, which I second that it is so important, and it's a journey and it's a practice, and that means it's not easy. It gets easier as it's, as you begin practicing it. But I think the final part to all of the steps that you listed is then to trust. Like, to me,
that's where the
connection.
Yeah. That's all that it is. When you're building a relationship only works if there's trust. But the way that you build trust is you got to spend some time together. That's why it's daily. So I call it the 5 Ds. It's daily: dedication, determination, discipline, and devotion. So in the beginning, you sit your ass down. Yeah, in the beginning, you sit your ass down out of discipline. Because A Course in Miracles tells us, and I'll say it 2 different ways, an untrained mind, an undisciplined mind can accomplish nothing. And you know this because if you've told yourself, I'm not going to eat the Twinkie, I'm going to go out for the run, I'm not going to spend the money, I'm not going to call them a booty call at 3 a.m. When you say a thing, right? And then like we know how hard it can be to like actually follow through. So it's like, so in the beginning, if you can't place your mind, I guess is what I'm saying is if you can't place your mind where you want it, if you can't be present, if your kid's trying to talk to you and you're more obsessed with your phone, you have an undisciplined mind. If you have a to-do list and you're like, I'm going to do this, but you keep getting distracted by social media, you have an undisciplined mind. Mm-hmm. If you keep making promises to yourself that today's the day I'm going to get up at 6 and go to the gym and you don't go, you have an undisciplined mind. So an undisciplined mind accomplishes nothing. Number 1. So I always say discipline actually leads to freedom. Because what happens is each day you show up daily with determination, with dedication, because you know why you're doing it. You know your goal. You know what you're going towards. And then discipline means I show up daily, every day. I don't care if I'm sick, I'm tired, I'm busy, I don't feel like it, my kid threw up all night, whatever. I don't care what the story is. Even just 5 minutes in the mornings with God is time well spent.
Mm-hmm.
So the discipline, it's like when we were kids and your parents would be like, or whoever your caretaker was, would be yelling at you, go brush your teeth before bed. Go brush your teeth. Go brush your teeth. You're like, I don't want to. Now as adults, we wouldn't, most of us, I'm not going to say all of us, most of us would never leave the house without brushing our teeth in the morning, right? So discipline ends up becoming devotional. You start to do it because you have to. Then you start to do it because you want to.
Mm-hmm.
Because now you've seen through daily proof the difference when I leave my house, when I've done my spiritual practice or I haven't. And I'm a person of deep, deep, deep unwavering faith, but it is not blind faith. It is faith that has been shown to me again. And I talked about this on the stage again and again and again and again. I have proof positive. I have my own personal proof. You know how you get your own proof? You have your own personal experience. You know how you have a personal experience? You show up daily for your spiritual practice and you see the difference in your life. So it's not just drinking somebody else's Kool-Aid or doing it because they told you to do it. You go and you have your own experience. I always say to people, take it or leave it. You don't have to follow my advice or listen to what I'm sharing, but do it out of your own curiosity. Do it because you're suffering enough that it's time to, as you can see my shirt, stop playing dumb about who you are and stop buying into these bullshit stories of yourself. So when your suffering gets great enough, those 5 Ds might come in handy. And you'll start to do it because either somebody told you to, your coach, your mentor, or you got the individual curriculum assignment for the day or whatever it is, or you're just desperate enough finally to surrender. And then it eventually becomes devotional. And that's the key. And trust is built in that daily relationship. It's like I always say to women, they'll be like, but I don't know how to connect to my spiritual team. I don't know how to connect to God or source or whatever they want to call it, or myself even. I say, yes, you do. Women naturally know how to do this. When you meet somebody at a yoga class and you kind of like them and you're like, oh, I'm like, what's the first thing you do? Is you make a date to spend time together. Then what do? You talk to each other, prayer. Then what do? You listen deeply, meditation. Then you help each other out. You become in service to each other. We do know how to do it. We just have blocks and barriers. That the ego puts in place because the ego's job is to keep you scared, sick, small, separate. It doesn't want you to know your true self. So we have to be vigilant, man, vigilant. And my whole life now is devotional. My life is devoted to be in the morning. Please use me. And I'm not special. Anybody can do it. That's what I'm saying. I made a choice to write the stories that I thought I was at the mercy of the world. I thought all the bad shit that was happening, it was inflicted on me. And then I realized, I can't change what happened, but I can change how I look at it. And I often say now, my mother's murder, losing her when I did and how I did, I say this all the time. It was a gift to me. Because in her physical absence, it created such a desperation, such a gaping hole, perceived gaping hole. We can't actually ever be wounded. Who you really are is spirit. Cannot be harmed, hurt, killed, maimed, nothing. It can't even be changed. Who you are as perfect spirit is perfect. But we have a perception as humans that we can be wounded and hurt. So my 12-year-old girl and into my 20s, well into my 20s, it was like, oh. But I often say it like this, just to bring it from up here to down here where it can be lived and felt, is that when my mother left, her absence created a lot of room for God to come in. And so it was like, she was how I navigated the world. She was the light of my world. We're all the light of the world, but I had made her a false God. So that's what children do with parents.
Yeah.
And I just, she was the great, she will always be the great love of my life. And, I was lucky enough to lose her at an age where I was still in adoration of her and in love with her. It didn't get weird yet. I wasn't a teenager yet. So,
I'm in that space right now.
Yeah, God bless. You parents know, right? So I still thought she was the bee's knees.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, we get to create our own experience at any time. You're about as happy as you make up your mind to be. That is the truth. You're about as happy as you make up your mind to be. And A Course in Miracles says, wake up in the morning and the first thing you do is you decide what kind of a day do I want to have.
Mm-hmm. And when we open up to receive that divine love that's already in us, like as I hear you share your story about your mom, and you that's when the healing begins. Like that's when we get to, just rewrite that story and reclaim our truth, really, which again just comes back to being that source of unconditional love, that child of God.
Yeah.
And I think if we all knew that, we would be happy and healthy and connected. And, if we could just remember that every day.
I know, but the world is not set up for us to remember that.
I know.
Like, that's the thing. And so that's why your curiosity, like you have to read books and you have to seek out mentors and you have to find people, a spiritual community, right? So you have to be able to train your mind. So meditation. And then it's like you got to spend time with quality people and quality books, spiritual community, spiritual reading. You got to be able to have one pointed attention. You have to be able to focus, put the fucking machines down, people. Be present for your life. There's like a lot of these different things. So it's understandable why we don't know that we're extensions of love or that we're children of God. It's not what we're taught. Because if we knew that, we wouldn't buy their products.
Yep.
They're not.
It takes the courage and the practice and the support to stay in the energy of that and the devotion. Like you said, your 4 Ds, it takes that. Like the steps are laid out before you.
And the discipline and the devotion, though, here's the thing to remember. I always say to people, and I said it at the summit, if you finding yourself not being happy or at peace, the first thing you have to do is look at yourself and look at your life and ask, who am I not forgiving? These steps to peace and happiness and to remembering yourself, it's a chipping away of all that is not you. Holding a grudge is not you. A Course in Miracles says you can have a grievance or you can have a miracle. You cannot have both. So much of these steps were like, and spiritual teachers and spiritual speakers in the world, we say in that world, say this all the time. If you could just remember, it's like, yeah, but what we have to remember is there are tangible tools and we can lay all the tools on the table. The teachers that came before us can put all the tools on the table, but we have to pick them up and we have to have discernment to say, do I need the tweezers or the sledgehammer?
Yeah.
So out of it, though, there is no peace. There is no peace of God. But A Course in Miracles is trying to teach. People think it's a course about love. It's not. People think it's a course about miracles. It kind of isn't. What it really is the knowing of the peace of God through forgiveness. Forgiveness is the key to happiness. This is what I know to be true. So it's not always warm and fuzzy in the light of the world. It's not all bliss and like everything's fine. This is getting down on your knees. And what I often say is if life brings you to your knees, you're already there. You might want to stay and pray for a while. So it's all laid out before us, but you have to want to change. You have to want, that's how my journey began. Because my mother started coming to me in dreams. First of all, I was suffering like a motherfucker. And then my mother started coming to me in dreams and she said, I've forgiven him. The man that murdered her. I've forgiven him. Now it's your turn. And I realized I was woefully ill-equipped to know how to forgive. That was not my environment. It's not who I grew up with, how I grew up with. Because if you came at us, if you knocked me down, if you did something to me, I'm going to fucking come back at you twice as hard. Like, that's how I was raised. Eye for an eye.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I had to learn that there was another way. There must be a different way. There must be a better way. And then I went in search of. I was on a quest to find the different or better way because everything I had tried, I started drinking at a young age. Thank God, I always say, like, I never had the addict gene. I didn't get it. I was able to deeply imbibe in a lot of bad things, but was able to step out of them as soon as I changed my mind to. So, I say I did all the things too young. I smoked, I drank, I did drugs, I had sex. I did it all too young because I was trying to figure out a way out of my pain. The things of this world are not the answer to what happens in this world, right? I said this once already. So it's like, okay, but I did use the helpful things of this world, books, you know, whatever, now they're podcasts. Back then it was tapes. We would get tapes, right? We'd listen to the tapes, the CDs. Now everything's downloads, right? You would find friends. You would get a spiritual community. You would find a spiritual mentor. You would get a teacher or a coach or a priest or whatever, the therapist. Because all A Course in Miracles is it's education, it's spirituality, and it's psychology. That's what it is. It's recognizing that this whole world is a classroom. Yeah. And which teacher am I choosing to navigate this world? Because which teacher you choose, ego or Holy Spirit, fear or love, you will have a really different experience based on what you're choosing.
Yeah. I love how you just painted that clear picture of ego or Holy Spirit or fear or love.
It's that simple.
It really is that simple. And, you know, that's the beautiful thing about children is like they see that and they experience that and share that so quickly without all the garbage and the stories and all the emotions that come up with it. So
yeah, kids are very clear. I mean, kids come through with a very clear sense of themselves. They think they're amazing. The whole world revolves around them.
I know. I love it.
They're not confused about who they are until a caretaker, a guardian, or a parent reflects a story back to them. And the first page on my website, you go to my website, the first thing it says is telling fucking story. Everybody's got a story to tell, and telling stories is a fucking blast until your stories start to tell you.
Yep.
You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not whatever enough. And those stories of limitation are not usually self-generated. We're usually in a state of wonder. I'm not saying all kids come through this way, like being confident, but most kids are in a state of wonder. They just think they're the bee's knees. They think they're amazing. Everything's amazing. Oh, look, they stick their foot in their mouth. This is cool. Like, oh, happy, right? They're just like, whatever. And then somebody says, you're weird. What are you, stupid? Knock it off. Go to your, like, you're fat. What everybody's saying is you're different. You don't belong.
Mm-hmm.
And all people want is to desperately be seen, be heard, to feel like they matter. They want to belong. They want to be loved. They want to love and be loved. That's it. That's the assignment. You are love. Your only job is to extend that love. But we make it very complicated. And it's not. I always say, A Course in Miracles, I might have already said this once. I apologize if I'm repeating. I say it's not difficult. It's different. And it's simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy. So in the places where it doesn't feel easy in your life, if you're a listener, somebody who's listening, if it doesn't feel easy, this is where you get help. This is where you go to a therapist, or you go to a spiritual mentor, or you find a coach, or you find somebody who has gone before you and who can help drop those breadcrumbs to help you. They'll put all the tools on the table. And if they're a good mentor, they're going to say, you know, I always say, don't fall in love with the pointer. Fall in love with what we're pointing to. So don't make these people false gods either.
Yeah.
Right? Don't make them your guru. The word guru simply means, I've been a yoga teacher for over 20 years. The word guru simply means, and I'll let the like Sanskrit scholars argue about this, but we can basically agree that it means, it is one who brings truth to ignorance. It is the one who brings the light to the darkness. And we all have our own inner guru. And sometimes outside sources or teachers will help us. But if we're doing our job as a spiritual mentor, I'm just pointing back to your own inner teacher 1,000 times.
Yep.
Don't fall in love with the pointer. Fall in love with what we're pointing to. Mm-hmm. You can fall in love with you know what I mean? You can be a fan. You can be a follower. You can like say, that's my mentor. I'm not saying that. There should be some
It's
reference.
the internal experience again.
Exactly.
It's the alignment with the internal experience and the self-responsibility to receive it and to create it in a way that feels good. Or
and to recognize too where it came from. Like one of the gifts that I find mostly in my generation, because I'm like 50 and above, right? It's like we did have reverence for the teachers that came before us. And so we acknowledge their presence in our lives, and we always give credit. How many times in this thing did you hear me say, Marianne said, A Course in Miracles says, my mentor said, this one said? I don't feel like I lose validation by giving accreditation or by, I'm not interested in copying anybody. I'm not interested in being some watered down version of somebody else. So if I'm going to have a teacher and I learn something from them, part of humility, which humility actually, what it really points to is your own true inner confidence. And it's not you, it's like you're relying on a strength greater than you. So it's really important that we point out, this is where I learned this.
Mm-hmm.
This is where this came from. And this is what I took away from it. But it's really important that we acknowledge. That's why, in the Christian tradition, it's like, oh, Jesus said this. In A Course in Miracles, we're like, A Course in Miracles said this. Or in yoga, we're like, Swami this, or teacher this said this. It's so important, I think, for us to recognize that we come from a lineage of mystics, that we come from a lineage of great teachers who remembered who we were and who left breadcrumbs for us, and acknowledge that. And I think I see something. The reason why there's so much confusion is everybody thinks it's so important to make it look like they came up with it and they're the original and they whatever. The way that we go home, Ram Dass says, is we're all just walking each other home. But when I get home, I'm going to say, oh, Steve told me to go left at the lights and then take a right at the thing. So part of this is acknowledging you don't know shit. And then if you're going to sound smart, acknowledge what's yours and what's not yours and give credit where it's due. And because the spiritual practice is it's how you do everything. How you post on social media is your spiritual practice. How you show up with your kids, how you eat, where you choose to shop, what you're putting on your plate, everything, your sex
life. Your whole life.
Your whole life is a spiritual practice. So I just see a lot of people out there, like either regurgitating information or trying to come across as a particular way when all that's required is for you to be originally you, is for you to be authentic. Which goes back,
where we started.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really our only purpose, because nobody else can do that for us.
Nobody else can be you. You are here with your own individual curriculum. So you never want to be, I always say and I tell this story. I remember when I was much younger, I was in my 20s. And a woman who was very wise, she was a psychic, a tarot card reader or whatever. And a friend had gifted me a session with her. And she said to me, she looked at me, and at this time I was living and working with Marianne. And she said to me, so basically the question, and she said it in a more mature way, but she said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, at the time I was like early 20s. And I was like, I want to be the next Marianne Williamson. And she looked at me and she just very wisely, legit, just right in my eyes. Like I always say, there's teachers who teach through bhakti, devotional, everything's like, and then there's shakti. So I always like a blend of both. I need shakti because I'm a little thick. Thick. But she just looked at me very kindly, and she said, why don't you try being the first Karen Kenney? And I never forgot that. And from that day forward,
you're doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're doing it.
That day forward, I was like, oh yeah, my job, God doesn't need a watered down version of Marianne or somebody else. I need to fully show up with me. And what's the thing I jokingly say, and I always say the Course in Miracles people will get pissed because there's always two levels of teaching happening. There's the higher spiritual concepts, and then there's delivering it in a way where people can actually hear it and receive it. So Course in Miracles, police, if you're listening, I know what I'm saying and I know what I'm doing when I say this. I just have to make that caveat. So I often say, the world needs help. God sent you. He doesn't need you to try and be like Amber. He doesn't need this. I'm not saying you are. He doesn't need me to try to be like Mary. I'm just using people we know. He doesn't need my sweetie to try to be like, Keith Richards. It's like he's a professional musician. We have to show up most fully in the expression of the divine that comes through us.
Yeah. And there's freedom in that.
Oh my God. Yes.
The permission to just relax into the truth of who we are. Like you just gave us that permission. You reminded us of that truth, which as you say that, I just feel like that feels so bad.
Yes. And you don't need anybody else's permission. You don't need to be told, you don't need external validation. Just assume that you got the bathroom pass or the hall pass from day one to go out and be yourself, to do what you don't wait for your mother to tell you or your boyfriend to tell you or your sister to tell you or the government to tell you or whoever to tell you. You were given that, A Course in Miracles.
It was your birth. Your birth was that hall path.
Yes, it is your hall path. Exactly. And so A Course in Miracles says it like this. I love, love, love this quote. it says, and I think I said it recently at an event I was teaching at, and I said, who would attempt to fly with the tiny wings of a sparrow when the mighty power of an eagle has been given to you? And we fly with the tiny wings of, and I love sparrows, so hear this, but we fly with the tiny wings of the fucking ego all the time. And it's the ego that gets us trapped in smallness, scarcity, comparison, lack, blah, blah, blah. I'm not good enough. Well, who do they think they are? Judgment, all that stuff. That's tiny wings of a sparrow. We try to make our way through the world, just like desperately keep dog paddling. But you've been given the mighty wings of an eagle, which is, my brother and sister, remember who you are. Remember to whom you belong. Don't apologize for it. Don't be a dick. Have humility. But know who you are and stand in your power and show up in that way, because that's what the world needs. That's it. It looks like you froze for a second.
You froze.
Yeah, it's okay. I can hear you still. I just,
okay, there. So you said, yeah, and we're back. Yep. And I love how you do that too. Okay. Like it's a, so
it's
you were saying,
a visceral reminder to myself to come back from my insane mind into my right mind where Holy Spirit is. That's why I always do it. And we're back. It's like, oh, I took a detour into Fayette. Or sometimes as a storyteller, I go way out into the field. And then it's like,
oh yeah, the energetic field.
I'm like, oh, I'm out here in the field, and we're back. Yeah, so.
Yeah, I understand that too. Well, Karen, I just really want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for the message and the clarity that you brought to the listeners. And I really want to invite listeners to tune into your podcast. I know that there are many to choose from. I appreciate the listeners that are on this one. And quite honestly, knowing that there are a lot to choose from, I only have a handful that I listen to, and yours is one of them.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Yeah, I really do mean that. And it really comes back to how we started this and how we came full circle about that authenticity. The world is really seeking and needing more of that in the spiritual community, especially.
Yes.
Just getting really real about how we're showing up if we want to create this shift that is we are being called to step into. And that is part of your messaging that comes through in the way that you speak with people and the way that you speak about your experiences and your mentors and your teachers. So I really just appreciate that you have that gift to do that. And for the listeners, I would invite anyone who's listening who's feeling right now in their body or in this space in their life that maybe they're noticing they're not where they want to be. And maybe there's some fear around that. Maybe there's some discomfort around that. And they know that they would like to shift something in their life, that they check out your website. This is like a small part of what I do as a healer and a coach myself, but really, like, I am not the expert in this area. Like, I've had my own experience around it, and I know that this is a part of the healing process. And so if you're somebody who's listening, who's really feeling this call to really shift and rewrite your story, check out her website. I'm going to share it in the show notes. I'm going to share your podcast.
Thank you.
And I want to ask you just to share with the listeners, in case people miss the show notes, what events do you have coming up?
So my next event, I'm just doing a little speaking gig in Amesbury, Massachusetts. It's a fundraiser thing. So that's October 1st for the Amesbury Chamber of Commerce. But really the next big event that I have is my 3-day Fearless Flow Retreat. It's coming up. It's November 8th through the 10th. It's in Whitefield, New Hampshire at the Mountain View Grand Resort and Spa. It's a really amazing space surrounded by the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And I've held retreats there for the past 6 years, so I have a great relationship with them. It's a beautiful, powerful space, and it's really like if you're liking what, you know, I always say, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, if you're liking what you're hearing, it's really just a chance to have a deep dive in-person experience. And I think the world is really craving those kind of in-person. I mean, don't get me wrong, the gorgeousness and the beauty of technology is somebody in California can be listening or present on Zoom or like on iTunes or whatever, and it's incredible. But there's nothing like the visceral experience of getting in front of somebody and somebody being able to really see you and hear you and feel you in order to create an environment. You know, in A Course in Miracles, it says, when 2 or more are gathered for healing, I am there. And I really believe that these experiences of getting together in a room can be so powerful. And so that one's November 8th through the 10th. And then my next retreat after that is in May 2020, like the 15th through the 17th. So I do 3-day retreats a couple of times a year, and then sometimes I speak on stages. But the podcast is weekly. There's a lot of ways. If you want a little KK in your life, God bless you. But if you do, there's lots of ways to find me. Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. It's just at Karen Kenney Live, Live. Just Karen Kenney Live is the way to find it. So anyways, thank you so much for having me.
The honor is all mine. The honor is all mine. And one of the things that I really love about you is how you bring like this, you integrate this really raw, authentic feel to the spiritual healing side of us. And I've never met anybody who does it better than you.
Thank you. That's so kind. It's so nice of me to say.
And the humor too, like, because I want to just end by saying, like, what I know in the world that I coach in is that for those that are willing to have the courage to go down the spiritual path, that sometimes it's not always easy. And there's a lot of discomfort that shows up along the way. And it's important to, again, come back to the choice in where we can also choose to lighten it up a little bit, 100%. Make it fun. And you do that really well.
The Course, everything points to it. Even says it in the Catholic tradition or in the Christian tradition in the Bible. It says it in A Course in Miracles. It says it in many places. You are the light of the world. Part of being the light is to lighten up. So another one of my big 3 or core values is humor. It's laughter. It's not making things so hard or so like the drama. It's like, I always say, don't deny your feelings. The Course says, don't deny your feelings. Just don't believe them. Like, don't make them too real, which is my language for don't make them a big fucking deal. This human experience, like, shit is going to go wrong. Stuff is going to happen. People we love are going to die. Awful, terrible, unbelievable, and incredibly beautiful and miraculous things are going to happen. And, like, let's just be here for the experience. Get some tools to navigate it better. Keep your sense of humor. Love everybody. Forgive everybody. And it just gets easier to be here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you can be deep in your spiritual practice and light in your experience at the same time.
100%. I sum it up like this. I say you can connect to God, you can have a deep relationship with God, and still have a shit ton of fun.
And we need more of that. We need more of that at this time in this world. So thank you so much for allowing me to share you with the audience. Thank you for being a light in this world. And I'm sure that our paths will cross again in person at some point in time. And I look forward to just really giving you a nice big hug when I do see you.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much, Karen, for all that you are in this world. I love you, sister. Have a wonderful day.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye.